Next, please. And so before Joseph had died, he had told them, "Don't be limited in your views with regard to your neighbor's virtues. Let your hearts expand. How precious are the souls of men." So he had that vision also of the worth of each person and how we need to be have a watch care program and really be aware of each other's needs. Next, please. Okay, so like we were saying, the women would get together every week and they would assess the needs. They would have a treasurer who write down everything that they were receiving and then decide how it would be used. Next, please.
Just what year are we?
This is now probably 1845, 46, because it was 1844 when Joseph was assassinated, and they left Illinois to go west permanently in February of 1847. So this is still at a time when most women are considered just property. They have no voting rights. You know, they can't get any job that they want. They're very limited on what they can do. But the church saw them as a very valuable resource. And so they were able to preach and expound scripture together. Emma Smith was told to compile a book of hymns, and many women were invited to write the hymns, and so they were really, utilizing the women as a backbone for the church.
The beginning of charity, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Early stages.
Yes, exactly. And that became their motto in, I think, 1920 or something. Charity never faileth became their motto. So, go ahead, Neil. And so again, Joseph's mother, she said, "We must cherish one another, watch over one another, comfort one another, and gain instruction that we may all sit down in heaven together." So that was the whole goal, was to just really look out for each other and be there for each other. Next, please. Okay, so Brigham Young, he was he headed the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He became the next president of the church in 1847 or 48. But at this point, he was kind of seen as the leader. And so he helped to direct people and say, we're going to have to leave Illinois because, again, the persecution is getting really severe. He was also told by Illinois state governor that the federal army was on its way to destroy the Mormons. So they were like, oh great, now we've got the Federals after us. And so he told the people, you need to start getting ready, start selling your property, start gathering what you would need to make the trek west. And Joseph Smith, a few years before this, had also said, we'll probably have to end up out in the west. We're just never finding a safe place to settle. Next, please. And so, finally, in that fall of 1846, they finally got the temple finished enough that they could begin to use it for the sacred purposes that were designated for the temple. And even though it wasn't completely done, they would finish a room and dedicate it and then use it. And so they had that kind of going on. I think within a week they had performed, I think, 1,000 different ordinances in the temple. And then by the time they left in February, the last people to leave mid-February, they had performed 5,600 different ordinances in the temple. And the people were really excited about that, because especially with the knowing that they were about to go on this life or death journey, they wanted to know that they were sealed to their spouses and their children and keep that. And also the endowment that we talked about before was to literally give them strength from God to get through that experience. Next, please. Okay, so here's a painting depicting their departure. And unfortunately, because of what the Illinois governor said, that the federal army was coming to destroy them, they left much sooner than they wanted to leave. They were planning to leave in April when there would be grass for their animals to eat on the way, but instead it was beginning of February and they kind of panicked and just started leaving. And so it caused a great deal of suffering because it was cold. It was very cold. It was, I think, one of the coldest winters on record. Luckily cold enough that they could get across the frozen river, but other than that, it was really difficult. Next, please. And also, of course, it was heartbreaking to leave their temple that they had just finished. So that was hard, and they didn't know, but very soon after this, I think within a year or two, the temple caught on fire. I think arson. Yeah, it was arson it set the temple on fire and it collapsed. So that was sad. But then we rebuilt it just in the last few years. So, okay, next. So here's a map kind of showing the westward exodus. And for about 20 years, they were able to move about 70,000 people down this trail from Nauvoo. Actually, the later group started in Iowa City and then came across, and they started different settlements along the way just to help the people as they were traveling to have somewhere to reach and get more food. So there were some farms that kind of they started along the way. But all the way to Salt Lake City, that was a long walk. So, next, please. Okay, so this woman, Sarah Rich, she was on that trek, and something that she said was, "Many were the blessings we have received in the house of the Lord, which has caused us joy and comfort in the midst of all our sorrows and enabled us to have faith in God, knowing He would guide us and sustain us in the unknown journey that lay before us." So they were well aware of how difficult it would be to travel exposed to the elements, but they felt like they had no other choice. And also reading many of the journal accounts, the women were saying, we were just so glad to be getting those persecutors far behind us, that this was better than what that had been. So they were actually rejoicing, even though it was so hard to make that journey. They were just glad to be away from the mobs. Okay, next please. Drusilla Doris Hendricks described that it was hard. There was not a wagon in the whole camp, but what had sickness in it, but we bore it with the patience of Job. Next, please. Eliza Partridge Lyman. Let me give a little more about her life. She gave birth to a son while in a wagon on July 14th, 1846, and her journal entries from later on, from December, recorded that her baby died. And she wrote, "The baby is dead, and I mourn his loss. We have done the best we knew how for him, but nothing has done any good. He continued to fail from the time he was taken sick. My sister Caroline and I sat up every night with him and tried to save him from death, for we could not bear to part with him, but we were powerless. I still have friends who are dear to me. If I had not, I should wish to bid this world farewell, for it is full of disappointments and sorrow, but I believe there is a power that watches over us and does all things right." And that's something else that I found as I was reading different accounts. The women always said, but God will do right for us. He will make this okay in the end. And I'm just really impressed with their courage and their faith. Next, please. Okay, so here is Emmeline B. Wells, and she later served also as the president of the women's organization. And she described that when they left Nauvoo, even though they couldn't continue to have their weekly meetings like they used to because they were strung out all across the West, but they never lost sight of the institution, nor the promises made to them by President Joseph Smith, but continued their benevolent work and still had that love in their hearts to keep looking out for one another. So, and there's another account. There were two companies that came by handcart. They were too poor to have wagons and horses, so they constructed these handcarts. And I have ancestry that were on these treks, and so does my husband. And they became stuck in a blizzard in Wyoming. There was an early blizzard in October. And one day they lost 17 people, and that's just how serious it was. They were running out of food, and they became stranded. Everyone was sick. They were too weak to move on. And luckily, about a week before that, before the storm had hit, a carriage had passed them on the way to the west. It was just, I think, some of the apostles that were coming back from England. And they just saw where they were and thought, oh my goodness, they're not going to make it before the winter sets in. So when they made it to Salt Lake, they said, there are these groups and we better get help to them. And so good thing that happened, because immediately when Brigham Young heard about that, and they were having a big general conference that day. Next, please. It says it on there. Oh, not yet. Back one. Well, he just said to them, let's see, I thought I had written it down. Oh, yes. He said to them, your faith, religion, and profession of religion will never save one soul of you in the celestial kingdom of God, unless you carry out just such principles as I am now teaching you. Go and bring in those people now on the plains, and attend strictly to those things which we call temporal, or temporal duties, otherwise your faith will be in vain. And Brigham Young is later, he was kind of dubbed as the Lion of the Lord. He had a very powerful voice and a strong demeanor. And so when he said, go and save those people, they're like, okay. And they felt for them. Every person in Salt Lake Valley over a couple years old will remember that they just did this very trek. And so they talk about how in the tabernacle where they were meeting, the women just started pulling off their petticoats and their stockings and whatever they could and just piled it onto the wagons and went home and gathered up food and blankets and whatever they could donate, shoes and whatever. And they helped to just stock these wagons, and then the rescue wagons went off and they were able to save those stranded groups. And actually the loss of life was considerably lower than it would have been. If they just waited or didn't know, surely everyone would have died. It was really serious. So, next please. So once things were getting more calm and settled in Salt Lake Valley, Brigham Young said, okay, now it's time to reorganize our Relief Society. And let's make sure that we have a Relief Society in every ward, in every city, and get the women organized. He said, we have many talented women among us, and we wish their help in this manner. They could find rooms for the poor and obtain the means for supporting them 10 times quicker than even the bishop could. So they knew that these women were strong, that they were capable, and that they could do anything that was asked of them. Next, please. And here I wanted to give a few examples of what life was like for them prior to coming to the valley. And because as I've been reading about these women, I just think, so they're being run from their homes by mobs, or they did have a time of peace. They could continue with kind of normal daily routine, or then they're traveling and sitting around a windy fire trying to cook something for their families. And I just thought all the while, and then you just don't understand this as well as women do, but they're still having to nurse their babies and dealing with menstruation and pregnancy and childbirth on the way anywhere. Babies don't wait. And there's stories of women that give birth under a tree, or just different things. Life continues, and so for the women to go through this was very difficult, but they also proved to be very strong and very capable. And I'm just so impressed by their courage and their faith. And there's a historian named Wallace Stegner, and he wrote extensively about the Mormon migration, and he just said, I don't believe what they believed, but their women were incredible. So with the church seeing how the women could be relied on, then more and more responsibility was being given to them. Next, please. So here are some notable milestones and achievements. They did a lot of amazing things when they were in the Salt Lake Valley. Started hospitals. Brigham Young had women go back east and become doctors so they could come back and train others to become midwives or nurses or nurse aides. The territory of Utah granted women the right to vote way before the United States did. So this is 1870. So that was pretty significant. And so they were organizing a silk association, so they had silkworms, and it's funny, the woman who was in charge of that would have nightmares. She hated the worms so much, but she did her job. And so they were able to have silk and be able to have some nicer things while they're out there. They started a hospital, like I said. They had their own magazine. And then they started a wheat program, which was really, really exciting because so the women were in charge of this big wheat storage program, and they were able to store so much wheat and grow wheat, and they oversaw all of this, so that there was a drought in 1888 and 89, something like that, or 98 and 99. And so they were able to use that stored wheat to take to the people that were suffering from that drought in southern Utah. And then also you probably heard about the big San Francisco earthquake and fire that was in 1906, and they were able to send a lot of donated wheat there. Also, there was a famine in China in 1907 that was really devastating. They shipped a whole bunch of wheat over there. And then finally, they ended the wheat program, or the Relief Society gave over the responsibility to the bishop. But they sold the rest of their wheat, 200,000 bushels worth, to the United States government. And that was used to help feed the poor as well, all over the country, and I think also to the soldiers overseas. So it became a big deal that here, we're gonna sew patches on shirts and not boo, but it became really, really big. So it's pretty exciting.